The stars outside the viewport of the galactic rescue vessel Solara burned cold and distant, like scattered sparks above a dying fire. The ship moved fast through the outer edge of the Drath system, its engines humming with the kind of urgency that meant someone, somewhere, was running out of time. Cole Harmon stood in the lower equipment bay, pulling on his work gloves and listening to the mission briefing through the small speaker clipped to his collar. He was 32 years old, medium height, with calloused hands and a habit of chewing the inside of his cheek when he was thinking hard. He had grown up fixing things, first old machines in his father's garage in rural Ohio, then underwater pipe systems, then deep space engine cores. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He was a mechanic, and a good one, which was exactly why the Interspecies Rescue Corps had hired him 3 years ago. The briefing was short and grim. A cargo freighter called the Veth Kara had suffered a catastrophic engine failure near the gravitational edge of a dying star. The ship was being slowly pulled apart. Its structural integrity was dropping by the hour. Multiple species were on board, along with cargo belonging to several galactic trade organizations. Rescue teams from 3 different species had already been dispatched. The Solara was the last vessel to arrive, assigned to the secondary suite, which in rescue language meant checking the parts of the ship that everyone else had already decided were not worth checking. Cole had been on enough of these missions to know what secondary sweep really meant. It meant going into the places that were too dark, too unstable, or too empty to bother with. It meant being the person who looked where no one else wanted to look. He did not mind that. When the Solara docked with the drifting freighter through an emergency magnetic clamp, Cole followed the Vorath rescue team through the connecting corridor. The Vorath were tall, broad-shouldered reptilian beings with flat faces and pale gray skin. They moved with military precision, speaking to each other in short, clipped sounds that their translation units rendered into flat, emotionless sentences. Their commander was a female Vorath named Sathara Vel. She had already organized the primary evacuation with what Cole could only describe as frightening efficiency. Survivors had been sorted, cargo had been logged, and sections of the ship had been color-coded on a shared map according to priority. Most of the ship was already marked in red, which meant checked and cleared. Cole moved through the main corridor with the group, watching the walls around him groan and shift. The freighter was not going to last much longer. The gravitational pull of the dying star was working on it the way deep water works on a cracked hull, slowly, steadily, without mercy. Loose panels hung from the ceiling. The emergency lighting painted everything in a dull orange glow that made the shadows look longer than they were. Sathara Vel directed her team with hand signals, and Cole followed the general direction toward the lower cargo holds, the ones assigned to his sweep. The Vorath had already passed through this section and marked it cleared, but cleared in a rescue operation often meant cleared of anything worth saving, which was a different thing entirely from checked thoroughly. He took a left at a collapsed junction where a beam had fallen across the main walkway. He climbed over it carefully, testing each handhold before he put weight on it, the way his father had taught him to test old floorboards before stepping. The hold beyond the junction was darker than the rest of the ship. His helmet light cut a clean white path through the black. The room was a wreck. Metal shelving units had toppled over each other like dominoes. Cargo containers had split open, scattering their contents across the floor. Cole swept his light across the space methodically, moving from left to right the way he always did, not rushing. That was when he heard it. It was a small sound, not a groan of metal or the distant crack of another section giving way. It was something softer, something with breath behind it. A low, unsteady sound that repeated itself every few seconds, like an animal trying very hard to stay quiet but not quite managing it. Cole stopped moving. He turned his light toward the far left corner of the hold, where 2 collapsed shelving units had fallen together and formed a low triangle of shadow against the wall. He moved toward it slowly, not making sudden sounds, keeping his footsteps even and unhurried. He crouched down and aimed his light into the gap. A pair of golden eyes looked back at him. Cole stayed very still. The creature inside the shadow was small, roughly the size of a large dog, curled tight against the wall with its tail wrapped around its own body. It had dark green scales that caught the light in small flashes, a narrow snout, and two wings folded against its back, except that the left wing was not folded properly. It sat at a strange angle, bent in a place where it should not have been bent, the way a branch looks when it is grown wrong from the start rather than broken later. The creature's back left leg was also visibly twisted, tucked awkwardly beneath its body. A cracked identification tag lay on the floor nearby, half buried under debris. Cole reached over carefully and picked it up without taking his eyes off the creature. He tilted it toward his helmet light and read the text stamped into it. Property of the Drath Hatchery Collective. Non-viable. Disposal authorized. Cole read it twice. Then he set the tag back down on the floor very quietly. The hatchling had not moved. It was still watching him with those golden eyes, breathing in small, careful pulls, as though it had learned some time ago that breathing too loudly was dangerous. There was dried blood on its injured wing. There were scratches along its snout where it had clearly tried to dig its way out from under something heavy. It had been here for a while, long enough for the primary teams to pass through, check their boxes, and move on. Cole pulled off his glove and reached slowly into his jacket pocket. He found a ration bar, the plain kind with no strong smell, and he broke off a small piece. He held it out toward the gap in the shelving, not pushing forward, just offering. His hand was steady. The golden eyes dropped to the piece of ration bar. Then they came back up to his face. Cole did not say anything. He simply waited, the way he had learned to wait beside broken machines that needed time before they trusted you enough to show you where they hurt. The hatchling did not take the food right away. Cole had expected that. He kept his hand exactly where it was, steady and open, the small piece of ration bar resting on his palm. The golden eyes moved between his face and his hand in slow, cautious shifts, the way a creature does when it is trying very hard to decide if something is a trap. The freighter groaned around them. Somewhere deep in the ship, another section gave way with a sound like a slow explosion, and the floor tilted 2 degrees to the left before settling again. Cole did not flinch. The hatchling pressed itself harder against the wall but kept its eyes on him. Then, very slowly, it leaned forward and took the piece of ration bar from his palm with the very tip of its snout. Cole let out a quiet breath. He broke off another piece and held it out the same way. The hatchling took it faster this time. By the third piece, it had shifted its weight forward slightly, no longer pressed flat against the wall. Cole could see it more clearly now in the light from his helmet. The malformed left wing drooped at a painful angle. The twisted back leg was tucked beneath its body in a way that looked like it had learned long ago to keep that leg out of sight, as though hiding it had become a habit. Cole felt something settle hard and heavy in his chest. Not pity, exactly. Something closer to anger, quiet and patient. He unzipped his insulated work jacket slowly, making no sudden movements. The jacket was thick and padded, designed for cold engine bays and depressurized corridors. He held it open near the gap in the shelving and waited. The hatchling looked at it. Then it looked at him. Then, with a movement that was equal parts courage and exhaustion, it crawled out from the shadow and let Cole wrap the jacket around it. It weighed less than he expected. Cole stood carefully, holding the hatchling against his chest with both arms, and made his way back through the collapsed hold toward the main corridor. The hatchling did not struggle. It pressed its head against his collarbone and made that same low, unsteady sound he had heard before, quieter now, as though it was too tired to be afraid anymore. He found Sathara Vel near the docking junction, directing the last of her team back toward the Solara. She turned when she heard his boots on the metal floor and looked at what he was carrying with an expression that did not change much, but somehow managed to communicate a great deal of displeasure. Cole spoke first. He explained where he had found the hatchling, which section of the hold, how long it had likely been there based on the condition of the wing injury. He kept his voice even and professional, the way he always spoke when he wanted someone to listen rather than react. Sathara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at the hatchling for a moment, then looked back at Cole. She told him the hatchling had already been logged. She said the Drath Hatchery Collective had filed the non-viable designation before the ship even left port. She explained, in the same flat and efficient tone she used for everything, that under galactic salvage and rescue law, a non-viable tag released all registered parties from any obligation toward the creature. The hatchling was not, legally speaking, anyone's responsibility. Cole asked her whose responsibility it was to leave it there to die. Sathara looked at him the way someone looks at a person who has said something in a language they technically understand, but find genuinely baffling. She told him that emotion was not a useful framework for rescue operations. She told him that the non-viable designation existed precisely to prevent resources from being wasted on creatures that could not contribute to galactic society. She told him that the hatchling's physical defects had been assessed by professionals at the hatchery, and their determination was final. Cole did not argue further. He had learned a long time ago that arguing with people who believed they were being logical was rarely useful. Instead, he simply turned and carried the hatchling aboard the Solara. A few crew members in the corridor watched him pass. A tall, multi-armed being near the medical bay door observed him with 4 of its 6 eyes. This was Asa, the Pruan medic assigned to the Solara for the mission. Asa was quiet by nature, spoke carefully, and had a reputation among the crew for noticing things that others missed. Asa watched Cole walk past with the hatchling and said nothing, but did not look away. Sathara filed a formal protocol complaint within the hour. Cole received the notification on his comm unit while he was settling the hatchling onto his bunk in the small crew quarters he had been assigned. He read it, set the comm unit face down on the side shelf, and went back to what he was doing. What he was doing was looking at the hatchling's injuries more carefully in the better light of the quarters. The malformed wing was a congenital issue, something the creature had been born with, not something that had happened in the accident. The twisted back leg was the same. These were not wounds from the shipwreck. They were simply the shape the hatchling had come into the world with, and someone at the hatchery had looked at that shape and decided it was not good enough. Cole opened his toolkit. He spent the next hour sorting through spare parts. He had clamps, flexible joining rods, padding material he used for wrapping sensitive engine components, and thin strips of adjustable metal banding. He worked slowly at the small desk in the corner, bending and testing pieces, holding them up against each other, discarding what did not fit and trying something else. The hatchling watched him from the bunk with those gold eyes, its head resting on its forepaws. By the time the Solara had cleared the outer edge of the Drath system and the dying star had shrunk to a pale point of light behind them, Cole had built something that looked like a small, supportive brace. It was not elegant. It was made of leftover parts and careful thinking. But when he brought it over to the bunk and fitted it gently around the hatchling's malformed leg, testing the pressure carefully and adjusting the banding until it sat right, the hatchling exhaled in a long, slow breath and stopped holding its leg at that tucked-away angle it had been using for what was probably its entire short life. Cole sat back and looked at it. The hatchling looked back at him. He decided it needed a name. Not a number from a hatchery tag. A name. He thought about the faint, warm glow the creature gave off along its scales when it was frightened. A soft, amber light that came and went like something burning quietly beneath the surface. He called it Ember. Ember blinked its gold eyes once, slowly, and then lowered its head back onto its forepaws and closed them. Within a few minutes, for what Cole suspected was the first time in a long while, the hatchling slept without pressing itself against a wall. The tribunal was held in the Solara's meeting room, which was not a very impressive space for something that was supposed to decide the fate of a living creature. It was a narrow room with a long gray table, 3 chairs on one side for the panel members, and a single chair on the other side for Cole. The walls were bare metal. The lighting was the same flat white that every functional room on a rescue vessel used, the kind of light that had no warmth in it. Cole sat in his chair with his hands resting on the table and waited for the panel to begin. There were 3 panel members. A Vorath representative who was not Sathara Vel, but who had the same flat expression and the same way of holding its shoulders like it was bracing for impact. A being from a species called the Morath, small and blue-gray with wide, dark eyes, who handled galactic trade law disputes, and a human observer from the Interspecies Rescue Corps Administrative Division, a woman named Carol Simmons, who had short brown hair and reading glasses, and who looked like she would rather be almost anywhere else. Sithara Vel sat to the side as the filing party. She did not look at Cole. She looked at her data tablet. The Vorath representative opened the proceedings by reading the complaint aloud. It covered the protocol violations in precise detail. Cole had removed a logged, non-viable creature from a rescue site without authorization. He had brought it aboard a rescue vessel in violation of quarantine guidelines. He had housed it in personal crew quarters rather than the designated holding area. He had constructed an unauthorized device and applied it to the creature without medical clearance. Each point was read in the same tone as the one before it, flat and unhurried, as though the weight of each item was identical. When the reading was finished, the Morath legal representative asked Cole if he understood the violations as listed. Cole said that he understood them. The Morath asked him to explain his reasoning. Cole was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who spoke quickly when it mattered. He thought about what he wanted to say, and then he said it the only way he knew how, which was plainly. He told them what he had seen in the hold. He described the space behind the collapsed shelving, the darkness, the dried blood on the wing, the scratches on the snout where Ember had tried to dig itself free. He described the way the hatchling had been holding its injured leg tucked out of sight, as though it had learned very early that showing weakness brought bad things. He described the identification tag on the floor with the word non-viable stamped into it. Then he told them about Earth. He did not make it into a lecture. He simply said that where he came from, humans had spent a very long time making terrible decisions about which lives were worth saving. They had looked at people who were born different, people who moved differently or thought differently, or needed more help than others, and they had called those people burdens. They had built systems around that idea. It had taken generations of pain and loss and argument and change before enough people understood that the problem was never the person. The problem was always the system that decided some people did not count. He said that he was not able to look at Ember and see something that did not count. He was not built that way anymore. Maybe it was sentiment, the way the Vorath commander had described it, but he thought it was something older and more important than that. He thought it was just the basic understanding that a living thing in pain, that was afraid and alone and had been left behind, deserved someone to stop and pay attention. The room was quiet when he finished. The Vorath panel member said that personal philosophy did not override galactic rescue law. The Morath legal representative said that the non-viable designation was a recognized and legally binding classification under 3 separate interspecies agreements. Carol Simmons said nothing. She was looking at her hands. It was at that point that Asa spoke. Asa was not on the panel. Osa was seated along the side wall as a medical observer, present only to provide health information about the hatchling if requested. Speaking out of turn was not standard procedure, and the Vorath representative began to say so, but Osa was already talking and did not stop. Osa said that during the routine health assessment of the hatchling the previous evening, something unexpected had come up in the scan results. Osa pulled up the data on a shared screen at the end of the table and walked the panel through it carefully. The scan had detected an unusually dense cluster of sensory nodes along the hatchling's jaw, chest, and forepaws. In dragon species, this particular configuration was associated with a rare ability called resonance sense, the capacity to detect structural vibrations and weaknesses in solid materials like metal, stone, and composite hull plating through direct physical contact or close proximity. Asa said that the ability was rare. Most healthy dragon hatchlings never developed it at all. The Drath Hatchery Collective's standard assessment process tested for wingspan, flame output, physical symmetry, and growth rate. It did not test for resonance sense, because resonance sense was considered too uncommon to screen for routinely. which meant the hatchery had looked at Ember, seen a crooked wing and a twisted leg, and written the hatchling off without ever running the scan that would have told them what Ember actually was. The Marath legal representative leaned forward and studied the data on the screen for a long moment. The Vorath panel member looked at Sathara Vel. Sathara Vel looked at the data and said nothing. Carol Simmons took her glasses off and set them on the table. The tribunal was adjourned without a final ruling. The panel needed time to review the new medical information before making a determination. Cole was told to return to his quarters and await the decision. He was also told, in careful legal language, that the hatchling was to remain in the medical bay under Ossa's supervision until further notice. Cole walked back through the corridor toward his quarters. He stopped outside the medical bay door on the way and looked through the small viewport window set into it. Ember was inside, lying on a padded surface, the brace still fitted on the back leg. The hatchling's gold eyes were open, looking at the ceiling. Then, as though it had heard him stop outside, Ember turned its head and looked directly at the viewport. Cole put one hand flat against the door for just a moment. Then he kept walking. The Solara reached the outer approach lane of Station Varath 9 at approximately midday by ship time. Cole was in the engine room when it happened, running a post-mission diagnostic on the secondary fuel converters, which had been making a sound he did not like since the docking clamp release back at the Vethkara wreckage. It was a small sound, barely there, the kind that most people would ignore. Cole did not ignore small sounds from machines. Small sounds were how machines told you something was wrong before something was very wrong. He was crouched beside the lower converter panel with a calibration tool in one hand and a diagnostic reader in the other when his comm unit buzzed. It was a routine update from the bridge. The Solara was beginning its final approach to Varath 9. Docking would begin in approximately 40 minutes. All crew were advised to secure loose equipment and prepare for standard docking contact. Cole acknowledged the update and went back to the converter. He had been in the engine room for about 20 minutes more when the door opened and Ossa came in. Ossa did not usually come to the engine room. The Pruin medic belonged to the upper decks, to the clean white surfaces of the medical bay and the careful organized world of health scans and treatment protocols. Seeing Ossa in the engine room, ducking 2 of its 6 arms to clear the low doorframe, was strange enough that Cole immediately set down his tools. Ossa said that Ember was behaving unusually and that Cole should come. Cole followed without asking questions. When they reached the medical bay, he understood immediately what Ossa meant by unusually. Ember was not lying on the padded surface where Cole had last seen the hatchling through the viewport. Ember was standing, all 4 limbs on the floor, the braced back leg bearing weight in a way it had not managed before. Both forepaws were pressed completely flat against the wall of the medical bay, the one that faced the direction of the station. The hatchling's head was low, jaw nearly touching the surface, and that low humming sound was coming from deep in its chest, steady and insistent, and unlike anything Cole had heard from Ember before. Cole crossed the room and crouched beside the hatchling. He did not touch Ember right away. He watched. The humming had a rhythm to it. It was not random. It rose slightly every few seconds, held for a moment, then dropped again, like something measuring a pulse that only Ember could feel. The hatchling's gold eyes were open but not focused on anything in the room. They had the distant look of a creature paying attention to something very far away. Cole put one hand gently on Ember's side. He could feel the vibration of the humming moving through the hatchling's whole body, not just the throat, but the chest, and the forepaws, and the jaw pressed against the wall. He stood up and went to the comm panel beside the medical bay door. He opened a channel to the bridge and asked to speak to whoever was handling the docking approach. The officer on the bridge responded with the polite but slightly impatient tone of someone who was busy and did not expect anything useful to come from a call out of the engine room mechanic. Cole said that he believed something was wrong with the docking structure at Varath 9 and that the Solara should not make contact with the primary docking arm until the station ran an emergency structural scan. There was a pause on the other end. The bridge officer asked Cole what he was basing that on. Cole looked at Ember, still pressed against the wall, still humming in that slow, measured rhythm. He said he was basing it on the hatchling in the medical bay. The pause this time was longer. Ravel's voice came onto the channel. She had apparently been on the bridge. She asked Cole to repeat what he had just said, and when he did, she told him in a very controlled voice that a structural assessment call could not be filed based on the behavior of an animal, particularly one whose legal status had not yet been determined, particularly by a mechanic who was already facing a protocol complaint. Cole said that he understood all of that. He said it calmly. Then he said that if he was wrong, the only cost was a few minutes of delay and a scan that the station would run anyway as part of standard safety checks. And if he was right, the cost of not listening was considerably higher. There was silence on the channel. Then Osa's voice came through, calm and precise. Osa said that the resonance sensibility documented in Ember's medical scan was specifically noted in the galactic biological records as being capable of detecting structural microfractures in metal composite materials at ranges of up to 40 meters. Osa said that Varath 9's primary docking arm was, based on the current approach trajectory, approximately 38 meters from the medical bay wall that Ember was currently pressing both forepaws against. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. Cole heard the bridge officer speaking quickly to someone off-channel. Then he heard Ravel give a short, sharp order that he did not catch fully, but whose urgency was clear even through the comm speaker. The Solara's approach engines shifted tone. The ship was slowing, pulling back from its final approach vector. Cole felt it through his boots, that particular change in vibration that meant the thrusters had reversed their lean. Minutes later, the station reported back. A deep fracture had been found in the inner support lattice of the primary docking arm, invisible to the standard sensor array, running through a load-bearing junction that would have failed catastrophically within 2 to 4 minutes of a ship the size of the Solara making contact. The fracture had likely been developing for weeks, hidden inside the composite layering where standard scans did not reach. The station diverted the Solara to the secondary docking bay. Cole stood in the medical bay and did not say anything for a moment. Ember had stopped humming. The hatchling had stepped back from the wall and was now sitting on the padded surface, wings relaxed, gold eyes half closed with what looked very much like tiredness. The kind of tiredness that comes after doing something that used everything you had. Cole sat down on the floor beside the padded surface and rested his back against it. He reached up and put one hand on Ember's side without looking. Ember leaned into the touch slightly. A few minutes later, the medical bay door opened. Ravel stood in the doorway. She looked at Cole on the floor. She looked at Ember. She stood there for a long moment without saying anything, which for a Vorath was a significant thing, because Vorath did not usually stand in silence unless something had genuinely stopped them. Then she asked how Cole had known. Cole did not answer right away. He looked up at Ember, at the gold eyes now watching Sathara from across the room, calm and steady and still. Then he said that he had not known. He had just paid attention. Sathara looked at Ember for another long moment. Then she turned and walked back down the corridor without another word, and Cole heard her boots moving away at a slower pace than usual, as though something had shifted in the way she was carrying herself. The tribunal reconvened 2 days after the Solara docked at Varath 9. The meeting room felt different this time. Cole noticed it the moment he walked in. The 3 panel members were seated in the same chairs as before, at the same gray table under the same flat white light. But the atmosphere in the room had changed, the way air changes before a storm breaks. Something had already been decided. He could feel it. He sat down in his single chair across from the panel and waited. The Marath legal representative spoke first. The panel had reviewed the updated medical documentation provided by Asa. It had also reviewed the incident report filed by Varath 9 Station Authority regarding the structural failure that had been detected in the primary docking arm. The report confirmed that the fracture would have caused a catastrophic failure event. It confirmed the timing. It confirmed the distance between the medical bay wall and the docking arm at the point of detection. The Marath said that the panel had cross-referenced Ember's documented resonance sensibility against the biological records in the Galactic Species database. The records confirmed everything Osa had described. The configuration of sensory nodes found in Ember's scan matched the profile of a fully developing resonance-sensitive dragon, a classification that carried specific protections under Galactic Biological Preservation Law, separate from and overriding the commercial designation system used by hatcheries. The Vorath panel member spoke next. It said that the Drath Hatchery Collective's non-viable designation had been formally reviewed and found to be based on an incomplete assessment. The standard hatchery evaluation process did not include resonance sensitivity screening. The designation was therefore being invalidated on the grounds of insufficient examination. Cole kept his expression steady. He had learned a long time ago not to react too quickly to good news, because good news in official settings had a way of coming with conditions attached. He was right. Carol Simmons spoke last. She said that while the panel was ruling in Cole's favor regarding the validity of the non-viable designation, the question of Ember's guardianship still required resolution. Ember could not simply remain in Cole's crew quarters indefinitely. A formal guardianship registration would need to be filed. There would be a review period. There were interspecies protocols for this kind of cross-species guardianship that had to be followed carefully. She looked at Cole over the top of her glasses and said that none of that would be a problem, as long as Cole was prepared to do the paperwork. Cole said he was familiar with paperwork. Carol Simmons almost smiled. The ruling was filed that afternoon. Ember was officially reclassified from non-viable to unregistered resonance-sensitive, a protected biological classification. Guardianship was granted to Cole Harmon on a provisional basis pending a 6-month review. The Drath Hatchery Collective received a formal notification of the invalidated designation, along with a separate notice from the Galactic Biological Preservation Office recommending that all hatchery assessment protocols be reviewed to include resonance sensitivity screening. Cole was in the medical bay when Asa told him the ruling had come through. Ember was sitting on the padded surface, watching Cole with those gold eyes the way the hatchling always did, calm and steady and attentive. Cole sat down beside Ember and told the hatchling the news in a quiet voice, not because he thought Ember understood the legal details, but because it felt wrong not to say something. Ember pressed its snout briefly against Cole's shoulder. Cole sat with that for a moment. Then he got up and went to find out what their next assignment was going to be. The answer came 3 weeks later, after the Solara completed its post-mission maintenance cycle at Vorath 9. The Interspecies Rescue Corps Administrative Division had received a request from a deep space infrastructure organization called the Kelvar Structural Authority. The authority was responsible for maintaining the frameworks of space stations, transit hubs, and deep space relay platforms across 3 star systems in the outer lanes. They had been experiencing increasing difficulty detecting microfractures in older composite hull sections, the kind that standard sensor arrays missed until the damage was already serious. They had read the incident report from Vorath 9. They had a proposal. They wanted Cole as their lead mechanic, and they wanted Ember. Cole read the assignment brief twice. Then he went to Asa and asked if Ember was healthy enough for regular work in a pressurized mobile environment. Asa ran a fresh scan, checked the leg brace, examined the malformed wing, and said that Ember was in stable condition and improving. The resonance sensibility appeared to be developing further, not declining. Regular use of the ability, Asa said, seemed to strengthen it, the way any capacity grows stronger when it is used and valued rather than ignored. Cole accepted the assignment. He spent the following week building a proper harness for Ember, better than the first one he had put together from spare parts in his crew quarters. This one was designed carefully, with a supportive structure that took the weight off the malformed wing and allowed Ember to move freely without strain. It had padded contact points and adjustable fittings that Cole could change as Ember grew. It was not a beautiful object, but it was a precise one, and it fit perfectly. And when Cole fitted it onto Ember for the first time and watched the hatchling take 3 experimental steps across the floor of the equipment bay with that new freedom of movement, he felt something in his chest that he did not have a precise word for. It was something close to getting it right. They shipped out on a vessel called the Aaron's Wake, a mid-size inspection craft that smelled of engine coolant and old metal, and felt immediately familiar to Cole in the way that working ships always did. The crew was small, 7 people from 4 different species, and they accepted Cole and Ember with the practical openness of people who cared more about whether you could do the job than about what you looked like doing it. Ember took to the work quickly. In the first month, moving through 3 separate station frameworks across the outer lanes, the Hatchling detected 11 microfractures that the standard sensor arrays had missed entirely. Each one was logged, repaired, and filed with the Kelvar Structural Authority. Each report listed the detection method as resonance-sensitive biological assessment, with the detecting entity identified by name, not by number, not by a tag, by name. Back at the Core Administrative Division, in an office on Varath 9 that overlooked the secondary docking bay where the Solara had safely berthed weeks earlier, Sethara Vel was completing a proposal document she had been working on for some time. It was addressed to the Galactic Rescue Council. It recommended that all rescue operations implement expanded evaluation protocols for non-verbal and non-standard life signs during shipwreck and emergency site sweeps. It recommended updated training for rescue team leaders on biological assessment limitations. It recommended a formal review of the non-viable designation system used by commercial hatcheries operating under galactic trade licenses. The document was thorough and precise, written in the careful language of someone who understood how to make institutional systems change. Sethara had spent her career learning that language. She used it well. At the very end of the document, in the notes section, in small plain text that was not required by the filing format, but that she chose to include anyway, she wrote one line. "A human mechanic showed us what we had decided not to see." She filed the document and closed her tablet. Out in the deep dark between star systems, the Aaron's Wake moved steadily through open space, its running lights small and warm against the black. In the crew quarters near the engine room, Cole was asleep in his bunk after a long shift, his toolkit on the shelf beside him, his boots still half-laced the way they always were when he had been too tired to finish the job. Ember was curled beside him, small and warm, the faint amber glow moving slowly along the hatchling's scales the way light moves on deep water. The malformed wing was folded against its body. The braced leg was relaxed. The gold eyes were closed. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and distant and countless. The same stars that had watched a small hatchling press itself against a dark wall on a sinking ship and try very hard not to make a sound. They were different now, those stars. Not because they had changed, because someone had finally stopped and looked. Sonnet 4.6. Claude is A.